This presentation of Road to Zion is made possible in part by a generous grant from Angel Partners. Angel Partners, committed to the programs, services, and technologies that support family values and lifelong learning.
In September of 1830, the church was less than 6 months old and had fewer than 100 members. But the mission of building a literal Zion had already been introduced into the doctrines of the church. And though the majority of the members would spend the next 8 years gathering in Kirtland, Ohio, it was understood that it was only temporary. The saints knew that their ultimate destination and destiny was in seeking Zion, farther west, on the borders of the Indian Territory, in Missouri.
Today, my journey begins in western Missouri at Independence. From there, I'll head up to the town site of Far West and see the cornerstones of the temple once planned by the church. Then I'll tour the restored Liberty Jail, where the prophet Joseph Smith spent approximately 5 months awaiting trial. Finally, I'll move north to Nauvoo and visit a few of the sites that were key to the early days of the city. In 1831, Missouri, and more specifically Jackson County, Missouri, was on the edge of civilization. The land was mostly prairie and had only a few settlements.
Now, the city of Independence, right where I'm standing, had only been around for about 4 years, and all it had was a courthouse, 3 general stores, and a bunch of log homes. Now, just west of this area was the border separating the United States from the Indian Territory. But to the saints, this was Zion. And for the next 2 years, they flooded this area, ushering in with them the most trying period in church history.
Today, Independence is a thriving city of over 100,000 people. Downtown, you'll find a well-developed historic district surrounding the courthouse with plenty of shops and restaurants to enjoy. And just a few blocks west of the courthouse, you'll find the main attraction of church history in Independence. On the corner of Walnut Street and River Boulevard, you'll find the land once set aside by the church for the building of a temple as the center of Zion. Today, the corner is home to 4 interesting sites for touring. There's the Community of Christ Temple and Auditorium, the Church of Christ of the Temple Lot Visitor Center, and the Visitor Center of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Here you can learn more about the history of the church during the Missouri period of 1831 to 1839 from the informational kiosks and displays located throughout the building. Next, I'm headed north of Independence in Jackson County to the Far West Temple site.
By 1833, conditions for the saints in Jackson County were intolerable. So after searching for land to settle, they decided to move up the road to less hostile surroundings.
The land they found was about 30 miles to the north of Jackson County, and as soon as they were granted permission, the saints quickly settled several communities. And by far, the most prosperous of those communities was Far West.
At its peak, Far West had its own schoolhouse, 2 hotels, 3 grocery stores, 6 blacksmith shops, and over 150 homes. And at the center of it all was this temple site. Now, the only tangible reminder of that once flourishing community are its 4 cornerstones.
Though the town of Far West no longer exists, the cornerstones of the temple were laid, as directed by Revelation, in the summer of 1838. Labor on the temple was to begin the following year, on the 4th of July. But the saints never got a chance to begin that work, and so the temple was, of course, never completed. You see, in late October of 1838, the Missouri militia laid siege to Far West, vandalizing homes and ordering the saints to leave the state. As the militia left Far West, Joseph Smith and several other church leaders were carried away prisoners and eventually taken to Liberty Jail. Northern Missouri was in uproar in October of 1838, with mobs growing and circling in every direction. War between the Missourians and the Saints seemed inevitable. But before fighting could begin, a secret peace agreement was struck in which Joseph Smith and other church leaders were then betrayed and then turned over to the state militia, who then brought them here, Liberty Jail. The prophet and his companions spent 4 winter months in the dungeon cell of this 2-story jail, suffering hunger, fatigue, and freezing temperatures. And as they endured all of this, the rest of the saints were being expelled from the state.
Exception to the door, there is no other means of ventilation. The rock walls are...
The 30-minute tour includes a dramatized audio presentation that portrays the demoralizing circumstances the prophet and his companions endured, as well as the sacred and instructive revelations given to the prophet during his detention here.
In order to make escape through the roof impossible.
Today, the jail has been partially reconstructed and is housed inside a visitor center. By mid-February 1839, word had reached the church leaders that the citizens of nearby Illinois were sympathetic to their plight and would welcome the saints. And so a large-scale migration began. What today is only a 5-hour drive took over 2 weeks for more than 8,000 saints to traverse on foot in winter conditions. Through the winter and spring of 1839, the saints made their way from Missouri to Illinois, passing through towns like Quincy, and finally settling in the village of Commerce on a bend in the Mississippi River.
Commerce was purchased by the church and renamed Nauvoo, which is a Hebrew word meaning beautiful. Now, this area quickly became the destination for the migrating saints, reaching a population in excess of 11,000, with 20,000 in the surrounding area. Today, the Church of Jesus Christ and the Community of Christ have reconstructed and restored these buildings and sites to look just as they did back then.
Today, I'll be visiting several sites around the restored portion of Nauvoo, with several more sites awaiting me on my next visit. The first 2 visits I'll make today will be to sites owned and operated by the Community of Christ Church, formerly known as the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
The homestead, as it was called, was actually already here when the saints arrived, and it became the first home for Joseph and Emma when they arrived here in Nauvoo. After they moved in, it quickly became a gathering place for the saints. Let's go have a look.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to the home of Joseph and Emma.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. It's considered to be a 2-room, 2-story log cabin of blockhouse design. So they slept upstairs and did most of their activities down here. Didn't take Joseph long to realize this is not much room for a family of 6, plus all the community activities, church activities, because this does become the headquarters of the church. And you've got people camped around on the outside and everything. I'd like to point out a few things to you in this room. Notice the musket above the fireplace there. That was used by the Nauvoo Legion. Now the Legion numbers some 3,000 to 4,000 people strong. The saints see it as necessary for their protection. They've been driven from their homes in New York, Ohio, and Missouri. The furniture that you see all comes from the 1840 time period. Did not necessarily belong to Joseph and Emma, but it's typical of the kinds of furniture that they would see. We're going to be going into another part of the house now.
Let's head in.
Move down this way. Now this addition comes quite a bit later. This is built after Joseph has been killed, but Emma and her family stayed here in Nauvoo. Emma raises her children, and in 1858, Joseph Smith III is an adult now and is married, and he adds these 2 rooms to the west plus 2 rooms up. He's been elected Justice of the Peace here in Nauvoo, so the amount of hostilities that were here in the 1840s is no longer here, and they're very well accepted. Emma's considered to be a pillar of the community.
Really?
Yes, isn't that amazing from what was going on in the 1840s? I'd like to call your attention to the little Betty lamp there in the window. It's a symbol of hospitality. In those days, the custom was that if the lady of the house in the evening was willing to entertain callers after the evening meal and the children were settled down, she'd light a light and put it in the window. And if she wasn't, then there would be no light in the window. Now, how well that worked for Joseph and Emma, even if they did it, I don't know, but you have to remember there's all kinds of people camped around out here, and people are always coming to visit and everything, so it probably didn't work too well for them.
Probably not.
But it was an interesting custom of the time period. We'll move on into the keeping room then.
Great. Wow, this is a really big room.
Yes. It really gave them a lot more space from what they had originally when they were just in that little room. And this, of course, then becomes the center of activity for the family, the church, and the community. And the story's told that sometimes Joseph would preach from here, and they would open up all the windows so that people out on the lawns could hear him speak and everything, and that was quite an occasion. I'll point out several things of interest in this room. I'd call your attention to this dark chair here by the table there. That chair is typical of the chairs that were made to be used in the Nauvoo temple. Now, we don't know that that one precisely was used there, but it is like the ones that were being made to be used in the temple. Another interesting artifact is the what looks like a stocking on the wall there. Your socks are made out of wool back then, and so when you wash them, if you don't put them on a stocking stretcher, they'll shrink, and so they won't fit you the next day. And so if you want to wear your socks, you put them on a stocking stretcher. Over in this corner, you see the yoke. Now that would have been put around like a boy's neck and shoulders and had buckets on the end. And then they would go down and get water and bring it back up for the family. They might have taken it up to the hill to the temple workers, or they might have taken it out to the quarry for water for those people out there. So that was one of the chores that the kids had to do. Notice the dishes on the table. The blue and white color is very popular for that time period, and the blue willow pattern was a very popular pattern. And we know that Emma used a lot of the blue willow china because when we did the archaeological digs in the 1970s, we found a fair amount of the broken pottery that was blue willow. And of all the places we found it, it was in the latrine behind the mansion house. Back then, if you didn't like something, it broke, you didn't want to use it anymore, you threw it down the latrine. No recycling or anything like we have nowadays.
Wow.
So, we'll go on to our next port then.
Okay.
Our next place. Well, we're coming up on the red brick store now. This is a reconstructed building as opposed to being an original building. The original was torn down in 1890, and this building was reconstructed in 1980. Joseph opened the store for business in January of 1842, and he was the first proprietor of the store. We'll go inside and take a look and see what's around in here.
Okay, wonderful.
Let's go inside and take a look.
Okay, lead on. Oh, wow, this is charming.
It is a charming store. We really like it. This was one of about 35 mercantile stores in Nauvoo at the time that Joseph was here, and he opened this one in January of 1842. Now, Joseph didn't run the store very long because he really wasn't a very good business person.
So I read.
Gave too much credit, didn't make people pay their bills and everything. So he turns the running over to other people.
I guess there could be worse faults, though.
Yes, exactly. So one of the favorite questions we always ask is, why do you think it's called the Red Brick Store?
Well, I have to admit, I cheated a little, so
okay.
I did read up on it. So, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's not because of the red brick exterior, it's because of the red paint.
That's right. And the red paint's made out of what?
Ox blood and buttermilk.
Is
that right?
That's right. Now, we matched the color when we did the reconstruction, but we didn't use the ox blood and the buttermilk.
So this is pretty close to the color then.
Right. And then I think we'll move on to the back to the next room.
Let's go.
This would have been the bishop's office. Newell K. Whitney was the bishop at the time. And this is a frontier, and so general stores in the frontier are used for many different purposes. And so this office would be where you could pay your church tithing, you could settle up your store accounts, and this is one of the store books that we have from that time period. And it lists the kinds of supplies that are there, and also who bought stuff and on credit and if they still owed or anything like that. We had an interesting visitor a couple of summers ago. She looked through this and found a relative of hers who still owed his bill. And so she looked to see how much, and he owed us a quarter, so she paid us a quarter.
Wow!
So that was kind of neat.
That's a great story.
Okay, well then let's go on upstairs.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to come up here on the little waiting room. If you had an appointment to see the prophet or the mayor, you might be asked to wait there. And perhaps if he was tired in the middle of the day, you might want to take a nap or something. So, and then this is Joseph's office here. Now, the furnishings are from the 1840s, but they did not belong to Joseph personally. Were not his. And so, but this is where he would do church business and some of these businesses, mayor of the town, etc. So, and then we'll move into the large meeting room here.
Okay.
Now, when the store opened and everything, this then becomes the largest meeting room in town. So this becomes the center of community life, not only for the church, but also for the community as a whole. And so there'd be all kinds of meetings here, city council meetings, church council meetings, a variety of kinds of things like that. Also ran a school here for a while for the children. But finally, Joseph asked them to find another place for their school because the kids made too much noise and he couldn't get his work done in his office. So. One of the things that happened here that's particularly of interest to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ is the formation of the Relief Society with Emma as the first president. And that happened on March 17th, 1842.
Now, is this the room, am I correct that this is the room where the first endowment session took place?
Right. There were endowments that were started here until such time as the temple was far enough along that they could do the endowments.
So a lot of stuff happened here.
Oh yeah, lots of stuff.
Busy
More than
room.
I've had time to tell you about, really.
Next, I'm off to visit a few of the sites owned and operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that represent some of the significant activities that took place during the first few years the Saints were in Nauvoo, beginning where else but the Brickyard.
This is the Brickyard. It's a reconstruction of the kilns and equipment used in the brickyards of old Nauvoo. Now, they're responsible for the distinctive red brick you see all over town here. Now, it's a pretty labor-intensive process, and only about 350 of the 2,500 homes were even made with brick. But brick making is a pretty interesting thing to see, and while you're here, you can see that process and pick up a souvenir brick of your own.
The process of making bricks was a long and arduous one. First, a thick mixture of water, clay, and sand was combined in a large mixing pond. That concoction was then taken, one scoop at a time, pressed into a mold and left out to dry for several days. Only after firing the bricks in a kiln for 8 days were they finally ready to be put to use.
Thanks, guys. I got my brick.
Next, I'm headed to the Family Living Center, a great pit stop for the whole family. The center consists of several stations where you can learn basic pioneer skills like candle dipping, baking bread and rolls, braiding rope, weaving, and even how to make a barrel.
The cinnamon rolls are baking right now, right in there. Really hot, hot. It's good, it's good. Ow.
The Family Living Center couldn't be more fun, but I think my favorite experience was learning how to weave.
Now step on the other pedal. Pull the reed again. That's all there is to it.
All right.
This beautiful shady spot is called the Groves, and it was the gathering place throughout the time the saints lived here in Nauvoo. In fact, not a single church meeting house was built here in town, so they came here.
Each Sunday, members would come to sing hymns with the rest of the saints and to hear church leaders speak.
Also, Conference of the Church was held here, and the Female Relief Society met here on this spot. I'm thinking there was a doily and a centerpiece involved in that meeting.
My next stop is the Land and Records Office, a family history center where you can search through historical records of those who lived in Nauvoo from 1839 to 1846.
Okay, thanks. So they try to make it relatively easy here at the Land and Records Office. If you're computer illiterate like me, it's pretty simple to just type in a name and pull up your relative here if there's any information on them. Or if you're not into computers, you can also look through some books here and look up your family name as well.
If you are able to locate your ancestor in the database, you're likely to find a wealth of information on their lives, and in particular, their experiences in Nauvoo. And if they own land in Nauvoo, you can even locate their property on the map provided, and maybe go and take a picture or two. But beware, some of the land may be currently occupied, so be sure to ask permission first.
So as you can see, you can come here in a very short amount of time and find some wonderful information on your relatives. Pretty cool. There he is. The Masonic Hall was at the heart of social life here in Nauvoo. It was the most widely used building in the area, so it was kind of a multi-purpose building with everything from Masonic meetings to church meetings, funerals to court sessions. It even has a ballroom. Music was a big part of life for people here, and people would travel from far and wide to hear church hymns. But perhaps the biggest draw was the musical and theatrical productions.
And as you can see, the tradition lives on with Rendezvous in Old Nauvoo, a lively musical that depicts what life was like in the city in the 1840s.
And it performs nightly here throughout the year. I gotta get going.
This charming production is staged entirely by church service missionaries, many of whom have little to no stage experience, but their enthusiasm and good spirit more than make up for it. Tickets to the show are free, but be sure to call and reserve your tickets well in advance of your visit, as they go quickly.
The decade between 1831 and 1841 was one of the most dynamic in church history. The church experienced its highest of highs and its lowest of lows. And though their plans for establishing a gathering place in Missouri were temporarily put on hold, they never gave up on their mission for building a Zion, their city on the hill. So they regrouped, and they moved here to this bend along the Mississippi River and built Nauvoo, their city beautiful. And oh, what a city.
On an upcoming episode of Road to Zion, I'll visit some more of the significant historical sites in Nauvoo before venturing out to Carthage and touring the jail. Then I'll head back into town to trace the process the saints took in bidding farewell to their prophet and city. Finally, I'll follow their journey across the Mississippi River and the state of Iowa to Winter Quarters, Nebraska. There I'll learn more about the saints' final preparations for crossing the plains to Utah. Be sure to tune in.
This presentation of Road to Zion is made possible in part by a generous grant from Angel Partners. Angel Partners, committed to the programs, services, and technologies that support family values and lifelong learning.